Good morning. My name's Ed Armentrout, and I'm the pastor here at Avondale United Methodist Church. The scripture I picked out for us today is from Mark. It's chapter 11, verses 1 through 11, which is Jesus riding into Jerusalem. As they approached Jerusalem and came to Bethpage and Bethany at the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent two of his disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and just as you enter it, you will find a colt tied there, which no one has ridden. Untie it and bring it to me. If anyone asks you, 'Why are you doing this?' tell him the Lord needs it and will send it back here shortly." They went and found a colt outside in the street, tied at the doorway. As they untied it, some people standing there asked, "What are you doing, untying that colt?" They answered as Jesus had told them to, and the people let them go. When they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their cloaks over it, he sat on it. Many people spread their cloaks on the road, while others spread branches they had cut in the fields. Those who went ahead and those who followed shouted, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David. Hosanna in the highest." Jesus entered Jerusalem and went to the temple. He looked around at everything, but since it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. And so about 12 years ago, we had the chance to go to Jerusalem, and I can't share it with you in this video, but for our service this week, I have pictures from the Mount of Olives looking down into Jerusalem, and then I also have a picture of being in Jerusalem looking up at Mount Olives. And the reason I brought those pictures is because it's only a mile or so between the top of the Mount of Olives and into the city of Jerusalem. And there's nothing on the side of that hill. In fact, now it's a cemetery for most of it. And so you can see people, even today, walking up and down that mountain, although for us, we would probably just call it a big hill, walking up and down it. And it's very steep. If you've ever tried to walk down a hill that's so steep it almost makes you run, that's the way that Mount of Olives is down into the valley of just before Jerusalem. So some things I want to talk about. I called this message Entry into Jerusalem. In John, we read about Jesus being in Jerusalem many times. In the other Gospels, it almost appears that this is almost the first time that Jesus is in Jerusalem. It's not that one's right and one that's wrong. It's just the Gospels were written from different points of view. The first three were really more about his ministry in the Sea of Galilee, and so they didn't focus so much on Jerusalem as John did. So this colt is very important. So it's the foal of a donkey. We don't really view donkeys very favorably. In fact, we kind of think of them negatively. But a donkey then was very important. If a king came into your kingdom and he was riding on a donkey, it was a sign of peace. If the king came in on a big horse, white or dark, whatever color, didn't matter, that was a sign of war. And so Jesus is coming to the people. Clearly, he's saying he's coming as a person of peace. Now, the problem is, and we've talked about this the last several weeks, is that many people in Jerusalem thought that the Messiah was going to come more as a king of war. He was going to get rid of the Romans, bring Israel back into the prominence that they had wanted. And so for Jesus as king, he is coming in meek and lowly in the time of peace. Now, the problem for us is we think of meek in a negative term, because we think of it as someone that gets pushed around, pushed over, taken advantage of. That's really not what meek would have meant 2,000 years ago. It meant you were a good person who you could be riled up, but you didn't get taken advantage of. You stood your ground. But it's just not the same way we view meek now. We just take it as sort of negative. So the colt had never been ridden, and that was important because it should have been a colt like that. Now we hear about them. I'm going to read verse 10 again for you. "Blessed is the coming kingdom of our Father, Hosanna in the highest." So that was as pilgrims would enter Jerusalem, that's what they'd hear. And it really comes from Psalm 118:26. "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." Sorry about that. "We bless you from this house to yours." And so anytime you arrive, you would hear that. This one who comes that we read about, it's really another phrase for the Messiah. Again, we've talked about this a number of times over the last several weeks. People in Israel, the Jewish people, thought the Messiah was going to be very powerful, king-like, able to get the Jerusalem back from the Romans. But he's coming in a way that is not what they expected. And it's just important to realize that what many of the people thought was going to happen and the way that Jesus was coming in, they just couldn't be more different from each other. So Jesus had a couple choices. He could have decided to come into the city and not made a production out of it. He could have just slipped in the city. There were millions of pilgrims because of the Passover. He already knew the religious leaders were out to get him. So this would have been an opportunity for him to sort of sneak into town. No one would know he was there. But that's not what God had in mind for him. And so you have this huge procession. And this week in church, we're going to have Palms. That's part of the children's story. And also we're going to talk about, what a production it is and how everyone could see him. And, you have this joyous parade. And then a few days later, you have his crucifixion. And I think what that, going from this joyful entry to the crucifixion, which is really important for us because it tells how much God loves us, that he's willing to give his son for us. But I think what you've got here, it's no different than what we do now. People don't like to hear what they believe is wrong, even if it turns out it's really wrong. And that may be what's going on here. Jesus is telling the people that what they are doing is wrong and that God really wants something different for them, and they don't believe him. And so whether it's the Pharisees, if they're afraid of power, if they're afraid of money, that because if Jesus really is the Messiah, then they lose that. If it's really less than that, if they're afraid that Jesus is going to lead insurrection, that's going to try to overthrow the Romans. The Romans are going to really come down hard on the Jewish people. And so if you want to take a more higher, thoughtful view of the religious leaders, they're just trying to help their people. But either way, Jesus is telling them something they don't really believe, or do they want to believe. So Jesus is really making an appeal to love, not just for the people of Jerusalem and the religious leaders, not for just the Jewish people, but he's really doing that for a whole world. And that's just what makes Jesus Christ so different in our life, is that he is welcoming everybody. And that just was not the way it was done then. And I would tell you, unfortunately, that's not the way things happen now. And so it's interesting, Jesus comes into the city, does some things, and then he goes back outside the city where he's going to be taken captive later. But he's not in a rush. He's not in a hurry. It seems all this is thought out beforehand. So he's kind of deliberate in his process. And at the end of the day, when he's tired, what we probably need to see in this more than anything else is that he has to go out to a place of quiet, a place of peace, and he comes by that peace by being in prayer. And I think for all of us is that we need to find a time in our life, and it doesn't matter if it's the middle of the day, the first part of the day, or the end of the day, but for us individually, we need to find a time of peace in our own lives. And so I've told this story over the last several weeks many times. The disciples keep talking to him about what's going to happen, and he keeps telling them. But they don't ever really understand. And we know that when two of them ask about being on the right or left hand. And so even though the disciples didn't always understand, they hung around. And I think that's important for us in our religious faith as well, is that we are not always going to understand everything that's going on. Things happen in our life that don't make sense to us. We see things that happen in people's life that don't make any sense to us. But just as the disciples remained near Jesus, it's probably important for us to do the same thing. So next week, will be Easter Sunday, our services at 11 o'clock. We'd certainly welcome all of you to attend. On Tuesday, there's an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting at the church at 5:30, and each Thursday we have a meal for the community beginning in April on the second Thursday of the month. Second Harvest has a new service that they're offering for people in this part of eastern Indiana. It's a mobile market. It has refrigerated food. You'll have some choices of the foods you take, and that will be between 4 and 6 p.m. Again, the second Thursday of the month. And so for us, that'll be April the 11th. We ask for a little love and grace because this is pretty new for them. It'll be new for us. And so we might be some struggles at first, but we'll work through them and get it to work as best we can. If there's anything that the church can do for you, you can reach me at 765-749-4354. We would be happy when we do a communion, Holy Communion, the first Sunday of each month. We'd be happy to bring that to your home if you're unable to join us. If you have any questions, you can reach me at 765-749-4354. God bless you.